Before sunrise, the temperature on the water is -11, not the cold that surprises you, the cold that has been here for weeks. The engines have been running since 0300. Ice has formed overnight along the dock lines. A deckhand is already moving through it carefully. The forecast was calling for it. Another system building to the southeast coming up the coast. Atlantic Canada has seen it like this before. The storms stacking against each other before anyone gets clear. The harbour surface sits flat and dark. But not for long. This winter has come in harder than most along these coasts. Back-to-back storms through January and February. Parts of eastern Newfoundland took more than 1.5 meters of snow in a single week. Atlantic Canada has been working through it, so have the vessels. What is running here is a circuit, St. John, New Brunswick, to Halifax, Halifax to Charlottetown, Charlottetown to St. John's, refined petroleum, the fuel that keeps hospitals running, furnaces burning, and vehicles moving across the eastern provinces. The vessel operating this run is a product tanker. She sits at roughly 37,000 deadweight tons, built for the ice-class conditions that define Atlantic Canada in winter, and purpose-built for these ports and this cargo. Her hull carries the ABS Ice Class 1B designation. Ice Class 1B means the hull is reinforced to operate independently in first-year ice up to a specific thickness. It means the steel plating across the bow and along the waterline is built to meet the ice, not simply to survive it.
Or there is a difference. She stretches roughly 180 meters along the waterline. Her beam, the width across the hull, runs 27.4 meters. That is the width of a standard highway, measured steel to steel. In the Bay of Fundy in February, that dimension carries weight. Below the main deck, the engine room holds the systems that keep this run possible through any season. The main propulsion plant drives a single, controllable pitch propeller, allowing precise thrust management in confined harbour approaches.
In a port like Charlottetown in January, that precision is not optional. The cargo tanks below hold between 260,000 and 265,000 barrels of refined petroleum product, divided into separate tanks. Gasoline in some, diesel in others, jet fuel where it needs to be kept isolated, each product bound for a specific terminal at a specific port. Before we continue, if this is the kind of work you want to keep watching, consider subscribing to the channel. So every video here is built around real Canadian maritime operations, the vessels, the routes, the crews, and the conditions they work in. If that matters to you, the subscribe button is how you tell us, and we want to hear from you. Did you grow up near the water in Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, BC, or somewhere along the St. Lawrence? Did a family member work the fishing fleets, the Coast Guard, a cargo run, a tug? Did you spend time on these vessels yourself? Leave it in the comments. People watching this channel know these waters. We want to hear from them. Now, back to the vessel. The run begins at Irving Oil's refinery in St. John, New Brunswick. Canada's largest refinery sits on the western side of the Bay of Fundy, processing crude oil into the refined products that Atlantic Canada depends on every day. The tanker loads directly from the refinery's marine terminal. Loading takes hours. The cargo transfer lines run hot to prevent viscosity problems in the cold. The diesel, in particular, thickens if the temperature drops during transfer. Deck officers monitor tank levels continuously. When the last valve closes, the process of departure begins. Tugboats assist the departure from the berth. In the Bay of Fundy, where tidal ranges can reach 15 meters, among the highest recorded anywhere on Earth, the timing of departure is not casual. The pilot stays aboard until the vessel clears the harbour and the bay opens ahead. The Bay of Fundy in winter is not a forgiving body of water. Swells build quickly when wind comes down from the northwest. The temperature differential between the air and the water surface generates sea smoke. Low rolling fog sitting just above the waves, visibility can close without warning. The watch rotation on a vessel this size is typically 4 hours on, 8 off. The officer of the watch holds responsibility for the vessel's safety, navigation, and situational awareness during those 4 hours. In hard weather, that responsibility feels different than it does in port. Either when the vessel is making ice, when the freezing spray is building on the superstructure, the crew responds in shifts, not with alarm, with attention. Ice accumulation on a vessel changes the stability calculation. It is monitored the same way a navigator monitors a chart, continuously. Freezing spray in the Gulf of St. Lawrence can accumulate at more than 25 centimeters of ice thickness in a single heavy event. That is not a statistic that lives in a textbook. It is something a crew learns to read in the feel of the ship, in the way she responds to a role. The first delivery port is Halifax. The city sits at the end of one of the finest natural harbours on the North Atlantic coast. Deep, sheltered, accessible year-round, Halifax has been receiving fuel by sea for generations. The approach is routine. The need is not. The discharge operation in Halifax takes hours. Cargo pumps run from below, pushing product through lines that connect to the terminal ashore. The deck is cold. The lines are under pressure. The crew works without rushing because rushing is how things go wrong on a tanker. When Halifax is complete, the vessel runs light toward Charlottetown. Running light means she sits higher in the water, less draft, more windage. In a winter, northwesterly, through the Northumberland Strait that is felt in the wheelhouse before it is ever read on an instrument. Charlottetown receives fuel by sea because Prince Edward Island has no refinery. Not what goes into the island's fuel terminals arrives by water. The vessel docks, discharges and departs. The island's gas stations and heating oil depots will run on what was loaded in St. John. St. John's is the final port on this run. The approach through Cabot Strait is the most exposed stretch of the entire circuit. Open North Atlantic from the east. The swells carry the full fetch of the ocean behind them. Nothing moderates them until the hull does. This winter, St. John's has been hit by storms that delivered more than 50 centimeters of snow in a single event. Winds gusting past 100 kilometers an hour have shut roads, closed schools, and kept people inside for days at a stretch. The fuel in those heating oil tanks still has to get there first. The Narrows, the entrance to St. John's Harbour, is one of the most recognizable approaches on the North Atlantic coast. Steep rock walls on both sides, the passage barely wider than the vessel's beam on a clear day. In heavy weather, the pilot earns every minute of that transit. Inside the harbour, the motion eases. The wind still comes over the hills, but the swells are gone. Dock lines go over. The final discharge begins. The gasoline, the diesel, the jet fuel, all of it going ashore to be distributed across the Avalon Peninsula. What leaves this terminal by truck will reach heating oil tanks in houses across the northeast Avalon. It will reach the airport, where jet fuel goes into aircraft serving outport communities that have no road access. None of that chain works if the vessel does not come. Newfoundland knows what it means when the weather closes in and the boats stop moving. The outport communities built around the fishery for generations understand supply differently than a city does. You plan for what might not come. You carry what you need before the storm, not after it. The discharge in St. John's is complete before the next weather system builds. The timing is not an accident. The vessel's schedule and the forecast are read together, not as separate considerations, but as a single calculation made by the officer responsible for the passage. When the vessel departs St. John's on the return run, she goes out through the Narrows again, heading west and south, back toward St. John, back toward the refinery. the same route in the opposite direction, the same work waiting the other end. The Canadian Coast Guard maintains ice operations and aids to navigation throughout the winter season on the Atlantic and Gulf approaches. Their icebreakers work the routes that commercial vessels depend on, and the relationship between the fleet and the Coast Guard is not theoretical. In hard weather, it is operational. The tanker fleet running this Atlantic circuit is small. A handful of ice-class product carriers operating under Canadian flag, rotating through the same ports in all seasons without pause. There is no off-season for fuel. The demand does not stop because February is difficult. The crew rotating through these vessels does not think of this work as exceptional. For most of them, this is simply the job and the route they know, i.e. the sea conditions they have read before, the ports they have docked at dozens of times. Familiarity is not the same as ease. It is something harder to earn. There are families in Nova Scotia and Newfoundland who have had someone working tankers, cargo ships and supply vessels on these routes for 2 and 3 generations. That institutional knowledge, passed from crew to crew, from watch to watch, is not written down anywhere. It lives in the way someone reads a swell. At 3 in the morning, deep in the Atlantic crossing, the vessel is quiet, in the way only a working ship is quiet. Engines running, the helmsman steady on the wheel. The officer walking the width of the wheelhouse once, twice, watching the horizon. The instruments doing their work. The vessel this season has run this circuit through more storms than most seasons see. Each one managed the same way. Speed adjusted. Course altered when necessary. The schedule is a target, or not a guarantee, and the sea has always been the final authority on what is possible. The investment behind a single run like this one is not abstract. A vessel at 37,000 deadweight tons, carrying roughly 265,000 barrels of product, represents the energy supply for an entire province for days. When the cargo reaches shore, it disappears into the infrastructure quickly. The tanks fill up, the trucks roll out. The vessel that arrives at St. John to load again is already the next link in the chain. The run does not wait for conditions to improve, it waits for a safe window. And when that window opens, even briefly, even between systems, the vessel moves. This is the part of the maritime economy that does not get talked about much on shore. Not the cargo itself. People understand that they need fuel. But the vessel behind it. The crew standing watch at 4 in the morning in the middle of the North Atlantic in February. That part tends to be invisible. The circuit will run again next week.
A different vessel, a different crew, the same ports, the same cargo, the same winter pressing down on the same coasts with the same indifference to what is convenient for anyone working it. The ice will return to the strait. Another vessel will take position on the route. Another crew will begin their watch. This work does not stop because the season changes. It stops when the need stops, and along these coasts, the need has not stopped in living memory.
And if this is the kind of maritime work you want to keep following, subscribe to the channel. There are more vessels, more routes, and more operations still to document. And if you have a connection to what you just watched, a parent who ran supply to a remote community, a grandfather who worked the Grand Banks, someone who crewed an icebreaker or worked a harbour tug, tell us in the comments, what did they operate, where did they work, what do you remember them saying about the job? And the people who actually work these waters have stories that don't appear in any logbook. We want to hear them.